together on the voice of women and the role of women in conflict and post-conflict settings. So our previous discussions have been with women from Colombia, South Africa, Uganda, and Northern Ireland, and they have so far revealed what I think is more commonalities than anything which divides us. And I suspect today we'll have possibly similar outcomes. Today's event, just to let you know, it's being recorded and live streamed on YouTube. So if you don't want your face popping up in a video, please do feel free to turn off your video, and that is completely fine. And I would also be grateful if everyone could keep their mics turned off to mute when you're not speaking, just to make sure that there isn't too much feedback or background noise. But so in the spirit of Euros 2020, let's kick off. So today's panel hails from Liberia and the Democratic Republic of Congo, Poland via the US and Geneva, and Ireland. And I'm going to ask our panel to introduce themselves today. We are waiting on just one more speaker coming in, but hopefully she'll be able to join us and we can seamlessly introduce her into the conversation. But first of all, I'm going to start with the co-convener of today's event, Agnieszka Fal-Dutra-Santos. Agnieszka, in 2 sentences, or less, can you please introduce yourself and the work that you do?
Thanks so much, Louise, and thank you to NIWEB for convening this space. My name is Agnieszka Fal-Dutra-Santos, and I'm the Director of Programs at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. And the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, or GNWP, were a coalition of women-led and women's rights organizations working towards the implementation of the Women, Peace and Security Agenda. So what we're talking about today, and primarily through amplifying the voices of women who work as peace builders in their communities.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. I'm going to ask then Adele Kibasumba to introduce yourself.
Thank you. My name is Adele Kibasumba. I am the president of Mahoro Peace Association, and also a senior and co-founder of Jimbere Fund. I've been an activist over 10 years, advocating for women in conflict zone and also minority in conflict zone. I have raised this issue just like this great panel, speaking at the UN, the White House, and also the State Departments to raise the issues of women in conflict zone and also minority who are impacted by conflict. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele. And finally, Aisling Swain.
Thanks, Louise. Hi, everybody. My name is Aisling Swain. I am Professor of Gender Studies at University College Dublin in Ireland. I have a mixed background, and I come to our conversation as right now I'm in a role as an academic, and I do a lot of research and teaching on issues of gender and conflict and gender and peace, and I do research across different contexts around those issues. Previously, I worked in humanitarian contexts and humanitarian emergencies with international organizations, so had a lot of kind of original practical experience on the ground, if you like, that I bring to the conversation, but working on these issues for over 20 years now.
Thank you so much, Aisling. So today's format is going to be mostly in a sort of Q&A style. First of all, I have a few questions that I'd like to ask the panel to start with, but if you have any questions that you'd like to ask at any point, there will be time to do so. So either you can type in your question or your comment into our chat box, or if you prefer to actually speak, if you can just raise your hand if you want to speak in person, and we'll try to get to all of you in the Q&A section. So I'm very happy for, let's get some conversation going today. But we're going to jump off with the first question, and it is, if you have just one wish for the Women, Peace and Security agenda in 10 or even 20 years, what would it be? Adele, if you don't mind, I'm going to come to you first on that question.
First, before I answer that question, I would like to kind of raise an issue that is going on in South Kivu, in the DRC. There have been a conflict going on for over 4 years affecting a minority group called the Banyamulenge. And this whole time, men have resulted into war. And a lot of people have lost their lives, rapes, mass displacement of women and children. The last 2 weeks, women have said enough. They held a sit-in at the airport and also at the headquarters of the general who's supposed to be guarding this area, and they have demands for the government to end this senseless killings and suffering. And they have stopped all the airplanes from landing because they have demands, and they need peace and they need security. This kind of like was intensified because there was a lot of arrests happening surrounding civilians, even families. Babies would be held in containers. Babies as young as 11 months old being held with their moms while being breastfed, and the whole family is held. So women said enough is enough. Men have tried for 4 years fighting using weapon, and now so the women felt that they're gonna stop everything, all the movement from coming in, and there's a UN peacekeeping mission there. There are commercial airlines coming in. Everything have been halted. They said we are going to only allow people who are bringing solutions in this area. And for 2 weeks, of course, delegations have been pouring in from the national government to come listen, and they're now paying attention. And had not the women stand up and say enough is enough, and no more fighting, you're going to pay attention to us. We're going to stay at the airport night and day without food, so that you guys can listen to the demands that this community has been raising without interventions. We would have resulted again in fighting. There would have been clashed. There would have been loss of lives. And so thus far, the baby has been released and the mother. But the women are continuing and the negotiations are continuing. So my wish in 10 years or 20 years would be that, the government the women that don't have to hold a mass sit-in for 3 weeks to be heard. It should be just an approach that all governments have to seamlessly just accept that women, bring a different approach that is non-violent, that is actually saving lives, to getting to, to peace. So that would be my wish. And it's not just the government, also the community should feel that way before they start, bickering amongst themselves or fighting amongst themselves. They should involve women into these things, and it should just be a new normal, instead of, as the last mean to, women feeling this is enough is enough. It should be the first approach that we use to get to peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele, for that. And it sounds like an amazing example of direct action on behalf of women, and something that's been incredibly effective. But you're absolutely right. Should we need a 3-week sit-in just for women's perspectives, which are often much more constructive than the male perspectives? And I'm sure there are, there are similarities in the Northern Irish situation where women here could wade in and say, yeah, it was when the women got constructive that actual, progress was made. But should it take that as an sort of an exceptionalism, instead of the men saying, well, no, we're busy fighting wars here, and not right now, we've got important things to do. Well, actually, when women come in and put forward their sort of constructive ideas, that's when real progress happens. And it should be a matter of course. And I suppose that's what 1325 in the Women, Peace and Security agenda is all about. I'm going to come on to Agnieszka to same question, and as well any comments you might have about Adele's previous comments.
Thanks so much, Louise, and thank you, Adele, for sharing and for highlighting this incredible advocacy and activism going on right now with women, or led by women in South Kivu, and sending all the solidarity and really it's a source of inspiration, but also shows how much still needs to be done, what you just shared. So one wish, it's really hard to have one wish, and also it's really hard to follow Adele and add anything to what she has already said so well. I think we have, working on this, we have a lot of wishes, right? We want more funds because the agenda is still underfunded, and we want more participation, meaningful participation of women in peace negotiations, but also of civil society in the Security Council proceedings, right? When we want more women, peace and security resolutions and more gender perspective in country-specific resolutions, for example, because this is really how at this kind of Security Council level, you operationalize those women, peace and security resolutions. But I think one thing, when you ask this question that the mind goes to, and that's very much in line with what Adele said, is, the foundation. I know we'll have Cora Weiss later with us, and I'm sure she will raise this too much more eloquently than I could. But going back to the kind of roots and the idea behind the women, peace and security, which is really to prevent war and to stop war. So just like what Adele said now, right? The wish for 10 years from now would be to not have that violence, not have conflict, not have wars anymore. As utopian as that might sound, that's, I think, the overall and primary objective with the women, peace and security resolutions. When we talk about prevention in this context, the pillar of prevention, we're really talking about preventing conflict and not only atrocities within conflict or violence against women. And just in the practical sense, I think what that means is, that shift in culture also that Adele spoke about, seeing peace as more than an absence of war. I just said this is, the first goal, but I think that comes hand in hand with just changing the way we look at what peace is. And at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders, we did a research a couple of years ago when the sustaining peace resolutions were adopted, right? So that was a new agenda at the United Nations that was meant to complement, or in a way, right, the women, peace and security agenda. And it's all about preventing conflict. And we went and we asked our partners, women in different countries. We had respondents from over 50 countries in the end. What does that mean to you when I say sustaining peace? And it all showed the picture. So many of them said exactly finding non-violent ways of resolving conflict, finding a culture that is rooted in peacefulness and harmony. But of course, they also mentioned caring for our environment, providing economic opportunities, building strong institutions. Like a quote that stayed with me is someone saying, we need to know that the police, they're there for us. We need to be able to trust. And I think this rings so true in the aftermath of COVID, where we've seen so much police brutality. So I think changing this culture and changing what we mean by peace and security. So really shifting towards that broader, more comprehensive, and we could say human security lens when we talk about women, peace and security is, I think, where we're going. I think there is this shift where we're seeing it already, and where I think we should go to meaningfully implement the agenda and kind of achieve that foundational goal, which is in the end to achieve sustainable peace. So to end wars and to build peace that's more than just a silence of the guns.
Thank you, Agnieszka. And I think that's something that has, run through all the conversations I think we've had throughout. Is it's not just an absence of war, an absence of violence. Peace is an actual positive, active thing. And I suppose as well, like you mentioned funding as well, and funds. One thing that that we see in a lot of places is, I suppose, you've got at the time when war is happening, it's like, no, the men are doing this, leave us be, and your issues can come later. And then when we actually get to conflict and resolution and peace resolution, there's a certain amount of funding, but it gets to a point, it's like, well, we have peace now, so you don't need to fund you. When actually, sustainable peace is about ensuring that women's movements and grassroots women are interwoven into that society and that solution. So I think it's something that is definitely shown that it's an issue, like globally, as well as obviously in all of our localities. Aisling, I wonder if I could bring you in there as well.
Sure, thank you. And it's been really lovely sitting here listening to both Adele and Agnieszka share their thoughts on this. And thank you, Adele, for bringing us straight down to the reality of what we're talking about today. And unfortunately, in so many ways, to have to hear the realities of the situation there in the DRC, but really brings home to us why the Women, Peace and Security agenda is necessary. And it certainly speaks to Agnieszka's points about, this idea of peace, which is where I would start from as well if I had a magic wand, right, and I was to make an actual proper wish that I hoped would come true, is to really think about the roots of this activism, I certainly look back to the women who came before me and us here globally, who started from a peace standpoint and started engaging with the structures and power structures from a pacifist perspective, to say that, you know, actually violence at any cost in any way is not where we want to go, and that preventing violence, preventing the outbreak of overt violence is what's needed. And so I wish that we could reorient our work and the women, peace and security agenda around a pacifist stance. And as Agnieszka said, that's absolutely wholly idealistic. And I acknowledge that, but I'm absolutely 100% happy to be an idealist when it comes to these issues. I think we've got to hold on to that. But I also understand the realities, and that needs to be balanced with the practicalities of how we make change. And that's engaging with the power structures that are presented in front of us, for those of us who are activists around these issues. And someone like Adele and the women that she's talking about and the realities of their lives, we've got to engage with the power structures. And I think the ways that we have done that historically through the Women, Peace and Security agenda, and you know, just to acknowledge, I'm coming at this from a much more global and macro perspective, and maybe an academic perspective. So I hope that's useful to the conversation. But, you know, in many ways, in order to get the power structures of the UN system and the Security Council and member states to listen to the realities of women's lives, the role that women have, the gender inequalities that women experience as a result of conflict and warfare, is that we've almost taken we've let go a little bit of the idealism and bought into the reality of the securitization of our global world, and the securitization of our funding and the securitization of our systems. And we've had to, in some sense, sell our idea of peace and sell the idea of gender equality to those actors. And that's been necessary and has been useful. And has got us to where we are today, I think, which is great. But I'd like to see a redress in the balance between that kind of the way that the Women, Peace and Security is part of a security system versus a stance that's pacifist and is trying to bring that system back out of its securitization and the reinforcement of its own securitization, if you like. And I think that's something for us to think about for, I mean, you know, it's a longer term project, 10 years, 20 years, even longer, but certainly that pacifist stance. And part of that, I think, is that with where we've got to with the Women, Peace and Security agenda is that the resolutions have been so important as tools and instruments where we can speak to security actors and say, these issues are relevant to you. We've had to do that. We've had to have these tools. But I would also like to see in the next 10 years, certainly, is the relevance of connectivity with wider instruments around the UN system, such as CEDAW, right? So the obvious one is CEDAW. And I think what that lends to us is the substantive equality focus that sometimes gets lost with the Women, Peace and Security resolutions, because security actors take it on and instrumentalize it to make it, you know, security more efficient, or whatever the argument might be. And so I'd love to see more joined upness and synergies between Women, Peace and Security and human rights instruments, so that how we go about implementing Women, Peace and Security is from that equality focus. And I think if we have that focus, that also lends itself towards a more pacifist focus, because the right to peace, the right to human security, which Agnieszka talked about, the right to live our lives free of violence and free of fear and freedom and free of want, those kinds of principles all are invoked there. And I just love to see over the next 10 years more synergies and acceptance at the UN level that it's okay to concurrently implement CEDAW on Women, Peace and Security, that there's no need to have these false dichotomies or these false divisions because human rights happens over here and security happens over there. And that states are parsing out their commitments on human rights and security. And we really need to actually get them to acknowledge that you have human rights commitments and obligations in war context, just as you have outside of them. And the CEDAW committee has made that very clear. So I'd love to see that movement towards an equality and pacifist focus. And we have the tools to do that. Just trying to convince those to get on board with us now is the job.
Sure, it'll be easy. No, absolutely, Ashley. Like, I think, you know, that kind of joined up thinking and that synergy between, you know, all these different issues, which are sort of, you know, for a lot of times, you know, for women, I think are like many sides of the same coin, you know, because women's ordinary lives are affected by war and conflict and violence, but you know, it's often bread and butter issues and bread and butter human rights and equality issues as well that are interwoven into it. And I'm sort of minded by the fact that when we had Madame Annalene, who was then chair of, who's vice chair of the CEDAW committee over, and she also had mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals. All of these things are interlinked in importance in women's lives, and And I suppose we now have Ya, our fourth panel member. So I wonder, Ya, if you would fancy dropping in. We're asking if you had one wish for the women, peace and security agenda in 10 or 20 years, what would it be? I wonder if you could answer that question for us.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me on this all-important platform. It's nice to be sharing this space with all of these amazing women doing great work. And also nice to be reconnected with Professor Swain, which I met at Justice Institute, University of Liberia, a women's rights organization which began operations in Liberia in 2006. And our goal was to respond to the sexualized violence that we may experience during Liberia's 14 years conflict. So my background is in sexual and gender-based violence work, as well as promoting sexual reproductive health and rights for adolescent girls and young women. So my wish for the women, peace and security agenda in the next 10 or 20 years, from a civil society point of view, is to really see the agenda being implemented through its full spectrum. And what that means, those are the words of the CEDAW committee in its concluding observation to Liberia's 7th and 8th periodic reports, which was the date in 2015, and they urged the Liberian government to implement the agenda through its full spectrum. Practically, I like to draw on some of the experiences from the Ebola epidemic and that of the coronavirus pandemic we're experiencing to show why this comment is relevant. So during the Ebola epidemic, I remember a morning where my colleagues were on their way to work and they saw a group of women standing in circle with what we call lapa in Liberia, is our African fabric that we make our clothes with. And we're standing in circle, concealing something. So they were concerned as women are given the work we do, our sensitivity level is always high. So they were like, what are those women protecting? And when they went there, they realized that a woman was giving birth in the grass next to the Ministry of Health. This woman, during the start of the Ebola epidemic, a lot of health centers were closing based on the response to the epidemic. So this woman was in labor, she needed to give birth, and she was turned away by so many health centers. And she ended up, she was like going to the Ministry of Health to seek support, but she did not make it. And she was just right next to the fence giving birth. And luckily there was a midwife passing by who ran into the shop, got razor blades, and then they concealed her to give birth. Unfortunately, she lost her babies, but my workmates approached, they got her to the hospital. And because of that experience, we're able to talk to our partner, Medica Mondiale Germany, to use some of the funds we had allocated for other activities, which is the beauty of working in a feminist organization. So give that funds to a women-led, women-owned hospital to keep their doors open to women during the Ebola epidemic. Of course, it's just a handful of women that had access to that service. But that experience, we always used to draw on the problem with governments and the partners implementing the women, peace and security agenda. The failure of our governments to really fully understand and implement the peace and security agenda through a nuanced framework, meaning what kind of impacts, such as the pandemic and Ebola epidemic, what threats do they pose to women, peace and security? Because Liberia is 18 years after our civil conflict. And when the conflict ended, Liberian women are noted for highly contributing to bringing peace to Liberia through the Liberian Women Mass Action for Peace. And at the time, the message was, we want to end the armed conflict. 18 years after, that message is still relevant, but that message has expanded to exactly what the peace and security agenda calls for. We want more women participation, we want women to be protected, we want not just the conflict, but sexual and gender-based violence and other threats.
Oh, I think we might have
I'm
lost.
so sorry,
Yeah.
I lost my internet. I lost my internet there for a while back. So I lost my thought too, so let me get it back. So what I was saying is, that's the message now, 18 years after the conflict, is we need governments. I will start with the government, all of the partners implementing the women, peace, and security agenda, to see the agenda not just in those limiting terms that's limited, for example, our national action plans, to a project-based document, but to be able to see and assess across all sectors of society what are those different threats to women, peace, and security. And the pandemic, and the Ebola epidemic, really highlighted that the way the response will not consider how will a health crisis impact or affect women's security. And we have all seen across the world how there has been increased reporting of sexual and gender-based violence cases, including Liberia. But the plans, as it relates to addressing these health crises, never really look at, okay, how can this crisis impact women, peace, and security? Women are only always called in to that point. So in summary, and there are many, many other indications that can indicate in Liberia, for example, why we have not seen a full implementation of the women, peace, and security agenda being implemented in its full spectrum. For instance, despite Liberian women's full contribution to bringing peace, we still do not have women included in decision-making spaces across all sectors. So for example, our legislature has 103 seats and only 10 women occupy those seats. Of course, but we have to still think about, okay, women play all this role. We are hailed around the world for being a good example for including women in peace processes. But 18 years after the war, on the ground, what the women, peace, and security agenda calls for, we don't have the kind of I would say, legislation, political will, and action to reflect this. So from a civil society point of view, I would like to see less lip service from the part of governments and other actors, and more action on the implementation of the women, peace, and security agenda. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you so much for that, and for soldiering on through there, even with your connectivity issues. You know, I think definitely, you know, there's a, you know, I think we all, many of us see that some parts of the WPS agenda or things are implemented, but never quite fully. And it's when it comes to that ceding of power and the opening of the gates, when, you know, that is the massive block that tends to happen. And it all needs to happen because, you know, this affects all aspects of women's lives, and we need to have women around those decision-making tables at all levels. We do have Cora Weiss with us now. Cora, I apologize that we're running a tiny bit late. I'm going to ask just very, very quickly if anyone has a question that they want to ask before we move on. And if you have a question, please feel free to unmute yourself and just speak. I'm happy for people just to join in. And I think everyone's a bit quiet right now. So what we'll do is, if anyone has any questions that they're saving up, we will come after Cora speaks. We can have a bit of a Q&A and a bit of a discussion at the end. But in the meantime, I want to introduce our next speaker. So we're absolutely honoured to be joined this afternoon by Cora Weiss. She has been nominated 4 times for the Nobel Peace Prize for her work on the front lines in international women and peace movements. And she participated in the drafting of UNSCR 1325 on women, peace and security, and she continues to actively support and monitor its implementation. She's been active in women's peace issues, from anti-Vietnam War to anti-apartheid in South Africa, abolition of nuclear weapons. She hosted the first women's radio program in New York City in the late 1970s, attending disarmament summits in the former Soviet Union, and organising peace tents on behalf of International Peace Bureau in the 4th World Conference on Women in Beijing in 1995 and the 3rd Women's Forum in Nairobi in 85. She's a member of GNWP's International Advisory Council and also serves as president of the Hague Appeal for Peace, and she has supported the UN from the 1950s onwards. I think, in short, in Irish parlance, if you will, she is some woman for one woman. So I hope you'll all join me in welcoming Cora Weiss to speak. Cora, the floor is yours.
Cora, you're muted if you want to unmute yourself.
Thank you. Thank you for that too generous introduction, and good morning and good day from New York City, dear sisters, mothers, daughters, friends. You're the most important people, most important women people I know, because you're the future. It'll be some or all of you who will get up at the United Nations one day and ask, why haven't you lived up to your purpose? What's the purpose? Determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war. It's been 76 years. Have you counted the wars? Some of us think that member states of the UN are more concerned about their self-interests than about gender equality and peace in the world. Without gender equality, there will never be peace. Do you agree? The Good Friday Peace Agreement that brought calm to 30 years of the Troubles in Northern Ireland has been a role model, and women and others from around the world have gone to Belfast and Derry to ask, how did you do it? What were the obstacles? What would you have done differently? I led a peace process tour to Ireland, and I remember asking Catholic and Protestant women what one thing they would like most to have. To a woman, they said, a safe place where we can meet together. When we went home via Dublin, we asked President Mary Robinson and the US Ambassador to Ireland, President John F. Kennedy's sister, Jean Kennedy Smith, if they could satisfy the women's wish. They found a place and the women were able to meet together. They went to see US Senator George Mitchell, who was the facilitator or negotiator of the talks, and asked for seats at the table. He said they couldn't have any. Why? Because it was for political parties only. So they formed the Women's Political Party. And two women not only sat at the table, but wouldn't let them move the agenda forward until women institutions. I tell you that story because it wasn't government women, it was civil society women, you and me women. And that's the only way change is going to happen. Governments and political parties will move when civil society pushes them, when we educate them, get them to understand that equality is critical to peace, to justice, to development, to happiness. Not just gender equality, but we need to end discrimination because of our color, our language, our religion, our economic class, our age, our size, our identity. You can think of other reasons for inequality. Equality. You don't have to have the same amount of money as the next person, but you shouldn't be denied your rights for being less affluent. I'll tell you another story about Security Council Resolution 1325 on women, peace, and security, which I think all of you are very familiar with. Women gathered at the Hague Appeal for Peace conference in The Hague in May of 1999 on the centennial of the world's first peace conference. A woman joined us from London and asked, why shouldn't we ask the Security Council to recognize women as peacemakers? A year later, a handful of civil society women gathered in the office of what was then called UNIFEM, now UN Women, and we hammered out a resolution. We gave it to Angela King from Jamaica, who was Secretary General Kofi Annan's gender expert. She gave it to her deputy, a young man from Russia, to put into Security Council format. That made us very nervous. Man, Russian. We picked October of 2000 to ask the Security Council president, who was from Namibia, to bring out the resolution on women, peace, and security, because they had just passed the Windhoek Declaration, which you should look up. And he would be enthusiastic about a resolution inspired by his country. Some of our women freaked out. Why? They thought that adopting a resolution would not have the power of voting and passing the resolution. It took Hans Corell, the UN's chief lawyer from Sweden, to point out that in the Charter of the United Nations, Article 25 says that all members agree to carry out the decisions of the Security Council. And he told us that makes it international law. My wish for the Women, Peace, and Security agenda 10 years from now would be for civil society women, organizations, or individuals. Sometimes it takes one woman to get an idea into motion, would take their governments to court in 10 years, sue them for not obeying the 3 Ps: participation of women at all levels of governance and at peace tables, prevention of violent conflict, and protection of women and girls during conflict. I also think I would start changing the word security, and I'd love your reaction to this. Security, national security, means military security. I'd rather say safety, because military security hasn't kept us safe. Women, peace, and safety. So how can this happen? 1325 should be in every curriculum, in every school in the world. Surely you live in communities where school curriculums might be suggested or influenced by parents. If the schools won't adopt the idea, take it to your parent and teacher meetings. Teach 1325 in your communities as non-formal education. Include it in what should then be peace education. And finally, when candidates are up for election, whether they be women or men, ask them if they would endorse 1325 as national or local policy. Vote for them only if they agree. 1325 is a peace resolution. It's a gender equality resolution. It's a UN resolution. The Generation Equality Forum should publish a copy of 1325 in everything they put out. They should endorse these and your other ideas for its full implementation. When you meet by Zoom, remember, it's the only almost free way to bring people together, and it's democratic. No need for visas, no hotels, no airplane tickets, no one to prevent you from meeting. Networking is essential and effective. Each time you meet, each one bring one. We need to grow so every gathering can be twice as big as the previous one. But we also need to learn. We need to learn more. When women decided to stop the atmospheric testing of atomic bombs in 1961 because our children were getting strontium-90, I'm not sure everybody knows what that is. It's the killer chemical in every nuclear weapon. We decided to stop the atmospheric testing of atomic bombs because our children were getting strontium-90 in their teeth and women were getting breast cancer. We had to learn about atomic bombs, why they were a health hazard, an environmental destroyer. Today, we need to learn why young men are picking up guns and killing people. Why are the police, who are supposed to provide safety, killing people because of their color? If we learn the root causes of violence, we'll have no excuse and we'll have to correct those causes. The best way to learn is to tell stories. Now it's your turn to tell yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Cora, for that. I think you'll all agree that there's an awful lot to be taken away from what Cora has just said. You know, I think education is a theme that runs through absolutely everything that we do, not just in women, peace and security, but in gender equality more generally. And you know, I find it very interesting, like what she has said about when in Northern Ireland, when George Mitchell said, sorry, only political parties can be here, so women formed a political party. And there are echoes of what's happening right now in from what Adele has been saying about, you know, men insisting, no, we're going to keep being at war, and women have decided to blockade an airport. And, you know, so there is an awful lot to be said for you know, well-behaved women rarely make history, and so forth. So I'm wondering, I know that we do have actually a founding member of the Women's Coalition with us, Brona Hines. I wonder, Brona, sorry, I'm if I'm ambushing you here, but I wonder if you have anything you wanted to add in to what was said there.
No, just to add one thing and then pick up something from the discussion. Yes, we had attempted over many years to engage with political parties, and when we saw the opportunity of a design process being designed to bring in people who hadn't been elected before, namely the paramilitaries, they were actually designing a process for the boys with guns. We thought, well, that will work for women too. And so we negotiated with government. And in the end, when we formed the Women's Coalition, it was formed within 6 weeks. We had a political platform within weeks built on the work in the women's sector, and we had the 5th largest party in the election, and it became quite an influential position. But one of the things I would say, and the interest is pushing the agenda forward, being the first like that, like we were quite green. I mean, some of us were very politically aware, but try to get stuff into the agenda and into the agreement. And now when I'm speaking in various places, I say, think about what you want, multiply it by 10, double it and multiply it by 10 again, because women never ask for enough. And we're looking for something more comprehensive than that. So we've learned a lot from what other women have done coming after us over years. And I think we need to add that all together to make something more comprehensive, because we all do it. We can learn, we can see the resonance from one another, we can collaborate and we can show support. I wanted to respond back to the issue that was partly raised by Cora and raised by Aisling as well, and actually speaks to the issues that the others were raising, is about changing the notion of security to safety, or to human security, a broader notion. And very clearly trying to, as Ireland as a country and several other progressive countries have been trying to do, is change the context for the so-called peace and security debate, which is very securitized. You know, that we need to think of engaging with the UN Council with those tools, and the Women, Peace and Security Resolution are tools. They didn't appear to be at the time when we were all trying to get them and get all the words in there, but now we can see them as tools. We can try to use them as tools and work on this strategy of engaging with the Security Council, but actually not being afraid, because women always develop the agenda, whether it's on gender mainstreaming, becoming equality mainstreaming, whether it's on gender budgeting, becoming equality budget, which is all of these issues. And I think women as being the largest group who are discriminated against, in a sense, and if we keep carefully looking at bringing on board all of our own diversity as women, we represent a huge group, an absolutely huge group, who can speak from a majority experience of what discrimination is about. And fundamental, and I've said this for about the 40 years or more that I've been involved in the peace process in Northern Ireland, and Aisling has raised it here about the fundamental connection to the peace agenda to the human rights agenda. In my view, it is the central agenda in peacemaking because it reflects what the Women's Coalition put in. Our three principles around which we organise were inclusion, rights and equality. Say it all. When I'm meeting with groups in Syria, they're talking about esteem, dignity, rights, full citizenship. And we know it's related to people wanting to grab and hold on to power structures and actually not make an inclusive society for everyone. So the issue about women who understand that agenda, linking it to the human rights agenda and being champions for that, and going ahead saying, actually, we're not talking about just dealing with security. We engage with that agenda, but we actually have a broader vision ahead, linking it to peace and development and all of those goals. I think it's essential. So I'm really glad all the speakers have responded to that.
Thank you very much, Brona, and thank you for letting me put you on the spot like that. If anyone else has a question or a comment they'd like to make, do please feel free to unmute yourself and just speak, or if you want to add something to the chat, that is okay too. I'll open the floor to anyone who wants to speak now.
I just want to give a shout out for the Irish women. They were terrific, but so are the South African women. We should all study the Women's Declaration from South Africa, from the peace talks, and the Windhoek Declaration. We have a lot of shoulders to stand on. Absolutely.
And actually, in one of our previous events, we had a representative from South Africa who was providing us their own story of South African women and women, peace and security. And, it was inspirational. And you're absolutely right. None of us are reinventing the wheel here, because there are a lot of commonalities between what we're experiencing. And a lot of those commonalities are power structures being defended by the men who are in power. And we can all learn from each other and uplift each other in solidarity. But by working together. Agnieszka, I see you've raised your hand there. Go on ahead.
Yeah, no, thank you, Louise. And just a few, and thank you so much, Cora and Brona as well, and of course to all the other speakers too. I just wanted to pick up on a point, and because Cora so beautifully encouraged us to tell stories.
Could you speak? Oh, right.
Speak up.
Could you speak a little softer, a little slower.
Lower, yes.
And louder.
Course. Sorry, slower and louder. There you go.
I'm the oldest person here, I'm sure.
So just picking up on, because you encouraged us, or Cora encouraged us so beautifully to share stories, and because this theme of human security, right, and challenging the way we think about peace, the way we think about security, and when I say we, I mean it more in the sense of the international community as expressed through its various institutions, because I actually think that the women in South Kivu doing the sit-ins that Adele talked about are already thinking in much broader terms. But a couple of stories on where I think women, peace and security is really, or has been, this tool or this opening for safety that Cora is talking about, or for human security. First of all, I think if we look at the local level and the national level, and localizing the women, peace and security agenda is one of the things that we do at the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. So we work with our partners, with local, national women's organizations, women-led organizations, to convene various actors at the local level and kind of translate the resolution, often first translated actually into a local language, but also translated into concrete actions at the national level and the local level. And what's interesting, I'll give examples from Georgia and from Moldova, which is closer to my home, because I'm sure Adele and Ya also have their own examples. The first national action plans, so the first national policy to implement the Women, Peace and Security resolutions in those countries, was very hard security focused, right? So it was all the number of women in the military, the number of women in police, the conditions, etc. And that's important too, right? Because in Moldova, the first SNAP has just finished being implemented. One of the points was or achievements was, men in the military are now taking paternity leave. So, that's good. That's changing the culture too. But it was also an entry point. And now the second, or in Georgia, the fourth national action plan that is being developed has much more of that human security lens. And for women activists in those countries, they say it was good for us to be able to come in with this language that was being understood, right, to do that work with that first plan, to then be able to have a second plan that's much more about all these broader issues of creating the culture of peace, of having women participants, etc. So that's I think a story or two stories from Georgia and Moldova that I think are show the usefulness of having that framework, even if, like Aisling said, it has at times been securitized, instrumentalized, but as an entry point to broaden it up later. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much, Agnieszka. We're almost at time, but so if anyone has any comments or questions, they want us very, very briefly, one sentence, one line. Now is your time, or forever hold your peace. Unfortunately, Aisling, go on ahead there.
I'll come in if that's okay. I hope some others come in. And I'm just sitting here reflecting, having listened to everybody. And, we've had Adele from the DRC, Ya from Liberia. Cora has mentioned quite a number of places. Brona from Northern Ireland, myself from Ireland here. In the chat, we see people coming in from the DRC and Nigeria and other places. And it just really is striking how there are commonalities in terms of the interests that we all have around pursuing gender equality in the context of peace and security. And I love the Cora's idea of changing that to safety. I think it creates a whole other dynamic around what we mean by security and really centers safety of people. And I think with that commonality and just something that Brona said sparked a thought, which is there's real opportunity here for commonality and cohesion across all of these contexts that share very particular concerns. And at the same time, I think we need to make sure there's still space to see distinctiveness, whether it's the kind of context that Adele described to us at the very beginning and what's the acute needs there, versus another place that will have a similar kind of challenge, but will manifest in a different way. And the idea that, as Cora said, we are a collective of women, and Brona had said, with the biggest demographic here around the issue of equality, that within that we're able to also create space for difference and different kinds of women's views around and their different priorities. So it just really strikes me that we're all coming at this and can see the utility and the importance of this strive towards a peaceful world and a peaceful agenda that we want to push. And within that, creating peace amongst ourselves and building on that and the diversity of the different voices, ideas, experiences that women bring in from different contexts. And there's not just one way to do women, peace and security. There's multiple ways. There's multiple different kinds of feminisms, and they are driven by the experiences of women on the ground. And I think that's a real critical way forward for us all.
Thank you so much for that.
Before you close down, thank you. I just want to speak on the acuity of the situation in Minembwe with women. Obviously, this comes, first I just want to thank GNWP for supporting the women in South Kivu through Mapashuja. But this area in Minembwe is very, in a sense, the women there, this is a very new movement for them. It's very remote. It's not connected. You will not search it on Google or internet and find it. Only if you speak to either me or Neema, who are following this situation very closely. Obviously, the women are not really connected to technology, and they have been attacked by the military for doing the sit-in, because how efficient it was. the military felt like they need to use forces against them, and some of them are still in a critical conditions for the last 2 weeks. Yet they persisted. Those who are doing well, those who escaped, they're still doing the sit-in. Even today, they use guns around the women just to disperse them, which is very unfortunate. In the meantime, doing the negotiations at the same time. So women are very persistent. I just want to call out for sisterhood around this movement because of its innocence. This is very, very new for women in DRC who are very traumatized by the rape and, using weapon, in any case, the human rights is not really respected. So it's a very, very young and innocent movement that needs a global sisterhood that's going to surround them and say, we've done this in Ireland, we've done this in South Africa, in Liberia, in Nigeria. This is the time for women in South Kivu, especially, the Eastern Congo. This is your time, and we're going to stand with you. So I call upon all our sisters who are listening, and then GNWP who have been supporting, to really rally around these women, because if they're not, if we're not able to amplify their voices, then the militarization is going to shut them down, and we're going to miss this amazing opportunity to really get to a ceasefire. Thank you.
Thank you, Adele. And I suppose as a final comment, I suppose if there is anything that we can do in practical solidarity, we have an email list now of people who have attended today. And if Adele, if you can share with us, we are happy to disseminate any information, because actually the most practical form of solidarity is for us to listen to what those women need and do what we can within our power to amplify their voices and make this an issue to protect their safety. Maybe more so than security. So look, everyone, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm so sorry we have to end it there because we're already running 5 minutes over. I think I would have loved to have heard you all speak all day, forever, because there's so much expertise in the room, not just our panelists, but also the amazing women who have attended to listen. We will, like I said, we'll send you out a follow-up email with if there's anything that Adele can share with us, and if there's anything else that any contact you'd like to be put in with anyone who's spoken here today, just let us know and we'll see what we can do. But for now, peace and solidarity to you all, and please enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.